You were left for dead.
Then death will have to wait.
You scared?
Only of dying for nothing.
Please, just let me go, she whispered. The rancher knelt and wrapped her wound with his own shirt. Have you ever held someone's life in your hands, knowing that one choice, one single moment of mercy or hesitation could destroy you both? Have you ever stood at the edge of the desert at dusk, when the wind tastes like dust and regret, and heard a voice so faint you thought it was a ghost? Silas Merrick had. It was late autumn in 1,883 inches, the Arizona Territory, near a place called Red Willow Creek. The sun was sinking fast behind the jagged mountains, painting the sky in shades of burnt orange and deep crimson. The air was cold, sharp enough to sting the lungs. Snow had begun to fall earlier that week, not the soft, gentle kind, but the bitter, biting kind that clung to the skin and refused to let go. Silas rode his horse slowly back toward his ranch, his body heavy with exhaustion. He was a man of 35, though his face carried the weight of 40 winters. His hair was dark, streaked with early gray. His eyes, once bright with purpose, had dimmed to a weary blue. He had been a marshal once years ago, before the war, before the blood, before the guilt. Now he was just a rancher alone on a wide stretch of land that felt more like a prison than a home. The only sounds were the wind and the creak of leather as his horse moved through the snow. Silas liked the quiet. It helped him forget the noise of his past, the screams, the gunfire, the faces of people he couldn't save. His wife, Sarah, had died 3 winters ago from fever. He had held her hand as she slipped away, whispering his name one last time. After that, he stopped talking much. Words felt useless. He was near the dry riverbed, fixing a broken fence post, when he heard it. A sound, faint, weak, carried by the wind like a dying ember. It wasn't an animal. It was human. Silas froze, his hand tightening on the reins. He listened again, his breath shallow. There, it was a soft cry, barely more than a whisper. He pulled his rifle from the saddle and dismounted carefully, his boots crunching in the snow. The desert was harsh here, full of jagged rocks and dry brush. He moved quietly, scanning every shadow. The wind carried more than cold that evening. It carried the smell of smoke and iron and something faintly human. Silas crouched low, his breath a white cloud that broke apart against the darkness. The desert around him was endless gray stone and dry brush stretching beneath a bruised orange sky that was bleeding into night. Somewhere ahead, wood creaked, a short, broken sound like something straining under weight. Then silence. Then again a low groan, half wind, half pain. He followed the sound. The slope was littered with tumbleweeds frozen stiff, and the frost on them glittered like glass. His boots made no noise on the sand. Each step was slow, deliberate, the way men walk when they've seen too many ambushes to trust the quiet. The smell of smoke grew stronger. And then he saw it, a small clearing ringed by dry sage and splintered fence posts. 2 of those posts stood taller than the rest, driven into the hard earth at odd angles, their tops blackened by char. Between them, the wind made the ropes sing. At first he thought it was just another warning, a frontier message from men who wanted to claim fear as their language. Then a flicker of motion caught his eye. There in the center of the clearing, someone moved. He froze. His hand tightened on the rifle. The figure was still at first, swaying slightly the way a branch moves when the wind has already passed. The ropes that bound her creaked, old hemp fibers stretching under strain. And then he saw the face, partly hidden beneath a curtain of black hair streaked with dust, the skin beneath it too pale against the copper light of sunset. A woman, Apache, barely more than a girl. She was tied between the 2 stakes, arms spread, the ropes biting into her wrists. Her body trembled each time the wind hit her, and the faintest gasp escaped her lips, a sound almost too soft to be real. The setting sun struck the beads on her torn clothing, scattering light like sparks off iron. The whole scene looked carved from fire and silence, as if the desert itself had held its breath to watch. Silas felt something twist inside his chest. Not shock, he'd seen bodies hanging from trees during the war, soldiers and civilians alike. But this was different. Whoever had done this hadn't just wanted to kill. They wanted to erase. He stepped closer, slow, the rifle slung behind him. The horse behind him snorted and pulled at the reins uneasy. The air here was heavy with heat and dust, the ground scattered with boot prints, and something darker blood dried to rust. When he reached her, he saw the truth of it. Her lips were cracked, her wrists raw and bleeding. The ropes around her ankles were pulled so tight, her skin was torn in places. Her head hung forward too heavy for her neck. She looked dead. Then she breathed. A short, ragged gasp, barely there, but real. Her head turned slightly, eyes fluttering open. They were dark, glassy, and full of something that made Silas's throat close up. Not fear, something deeper. Defiance clinging to the edge of despair. She tried to speak. The words came out in a rasp that the wind almost stole away. "Please," her voice cracked. "Please, just let me go." The sound of it hit him harder than any bullet ever had. He lowered his rifle, swallowed hard. For a moment he couldn't move. Then instinct took over. He dropped to his knees, pulled the knife from his belt, and reached for the ropes. "Easy," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Easy now." Her eyes followed the knife, wide, unblinking. She flinched, tried to twist away, but the bindings held her fast. He saw her strength fading with every breath, the tremor in her arms, the effort it took just to stay upright. "Hold still," he said. "You'll tear yourself open." The first rope resisted the blade, frayed but stubborn. He pressed harder, sawing slow, careful not to nick her skin. The smell of burnt hemp mixed with the metallic scent of blood. His fingers ached from the cold. At last the rope gave with a dull snap. Her right arm fell free, limp as a broken branch. She didn't cry out, just sagged forward, the movement weak and heavy. He caught her before she hit the ground. Her body was hot, fever hot, and lighter than he expected. He could feel her ribs through the torn cloth. She was breathing shallow, every breath a tremor. He glanced around. There were footprints leading away, men's boots, maybe 3 or 4. Whoever did this had left hours ago. The fire pit near the stakes was still warm, the ashes glowing faintly red beneath a crust of sand. He cut the second rope, then the third at her ankles. Each time the knife bit through, the sound of the fibers parting seemed too loud in the vast quiet. When the last knot fell, she collapsed fully, her knees striking the earth. Silas caught her again, lowering her carefully, the dust swirling around them like ghost breath. Her head lolled against his chest, eyes half open. "You're safe," he said. She tried to push him away with what little strength she had. "No, you shouldn't." Her voice was dry as stone. "They'll come back. They'll kill you too." He shook his head. "Let them try." "Why?" she whispered. "You're one of them." Silas looked down at her, at the bruises, the blood, the remnants of pride, still written in the way she held her chin. "Not today," he said. He tore a strip from his sleeve and pressed it against the gash on her side. She gasped, her fingers clutching weakly at his arm. He held steady until her breathing slowed again. "Stay with me," he murmured. "You hear? Stay." She blinked once, twice. "Water," she croaked. He fumbled for the canteen and tilted it gently to her lips. She drank greedily at first, then coughed the water spilling down her chin. Her throat worked as she swallowed again, slower this time. "Better." She nodded faintly. He studied her for a moment, the high cheekbones, the streak of dirt across her brow, the faint pulse fluttering in her throat. She looked like someone carved from the desert itself, beautiful, battered, unyielding. "Can you stand?" he asked. She tried. Her knees buckled. He caught her again before she fell. The moment her weight settled against him, something inside him shifted. He'd carried wounded men before, dying men, but never someone who made him remember what it meant to protect instead of avenge. He looked at the ropes scattered at their feet. They looked like dead snakes, now useless and ugly. The sight of them made his jaw tighten. He picked her up, one arm beneath her knees, the other around her shoulders. She was light, frighteningly so. Her head fell against his chest, and he felt the faint warmth of her breath through his shirt. The horse whinnied softly when he approached. "Easy," he said to both of them. "We're leaving." He mounted with her in his arms, settling her across his lap, and turned the horse toward the canyon. Behind them, the posts leaned in the dying light, two wooden sentinels watching in silence. The desert swallowed the sound of hoofbeats, leaving only the wind. They rode for hours through stretches of land that glowed silver under the rising moon. The cold bit deep, and each gust of wind felt like a knife against his face. Aiyana, though he didn't yet know her, name shivered in his arms, her breathing shallow but steady. Every so often she murmured something in Apache words he didn't understand, but whose tone carried both sorrow and strength. When the horse stumbled, he slowed, rubbing its neck, whispering softly, until it steadied again. He felt the tremor of the woman's heartbeat against his ribs. Too fast, too weak. Almost there, he whispered, though there was no there in sight. Only miles of frozen ground and the faint glow of starlight on stone. The longer they rode, the more his mind betrayed him. He saw flashes of other nights. Gettysburg, Antietam, faces of boys no older than 20, lying in the mud, their eyes wide with disbelief. He remembered the smell of gunpowder and blood, the sound of prayers muttered through clenched teeth. Back then, mercy had been a luxury few could afford. But tonight, under this vast and pitiless sky, mercy was all he had left. By the time he reached the ridge above his ranch, dawn was breaking. The first light turned the frost on the sage into fire. He stopped breathless, the horse steaming in the cold. The woman stirred in his arms, eyes fluttering open. "Where?" she murmured. "Home," he said. "Yours," she whispered, almost incredulous. He nodded. "For now, it'll do." Her gaze lingered on him for a moment, searching as if trying to decide whether to believe him. Then her eyes closed again, exhaustion claiming what fear hadn't. Silas looked out across the valley, the outline of his small cabin, the smoke rising faintly from the chimney, the empty corral beyond. It wasn't much. It wasn't even safe. But it was standing, and right now that was enough. He nudged the horse forward. The wind at his back carried the faint echo of something, a memory, a promise, a warning. He didn't look back. When they reached the cabin, the world was fully awake. The light was soft, the air sharp with frost. Silas dismounted slowly, every muscle aching, and lifted the woman down. Her body went limp in his arms, too weak to protest. He carried her inside and laid her gently on the cot near the stove. For a long moment, he just stood there, staring at her, the knife still hanging from his belt, the smell of rope still clinging to his coat. The fire hissed softly in the stove, the only sound between them. He pulled a blanket over her shoulders, then crouched beside her. Her face, now in the light, looked even younger, though the lines of suffering made her seem older than any number could measure. He brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "You're safe," he said quietly, though he wasn't sure it was true. "You hear me? You're safe." Her lips parted, and in a voice so faint he almost missed it, she whispered, "You shouldn't have come." Maybe he said, "But I did." She turned her head slightly, eyes half open, and for the first time he saw what lay behind them, not just pain, but fire. The kind that refuses to die even when everything else has burned away. Silas sat back, rubbing his hands together near the stove, his mind racing. He knew the men who'd done this wouldn't let her vanish quietly. They'd come looking, and when they did, they'd bring more rope. But for now, she was alive, and that was more than enough reason to stay. He poured water into a tin cup, set it beside her, then sank into the chair by the fire. The light outside shifted gold, giving way to gray. He could feel the day beginning, and with it the weight of everything that came next. Outside, the wind passed through the pines, whispering a single sound that might have been words or just memory. Inside, two strangers shared the same silence, the kind that binds before it breaks. Silas leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes on the fire. He thought about the two posts standing out there in the desert alone, now waiting for the next cruelty the world would invent. And he thought about her still breathing, still here. He whispered it again, not to her this time, but to himself. Not today. A young woman, Apache, barely more than 20. Her skin was pale beneath the dirt and blood. Her clothes were torn, her sides soaked red. She was breathing hard, her eyes half open, staring at nothing. When Silas stepped closer, she flinched, tried to move, but the pain was too much. He knelt beside her, his rifle set down gently in the snow. "You're hurt," he said softly. Her lips trembled. Her hand reached weakly for something, a small knife too far for her to grab. She looked at him, her dark eyes steady despite the agony. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Just let me go. Make it quick." The words hit him like a hammer to the chest. Silas froze. For a moment he didn't breathe. He had seen death before too many times, but never had someone asked him for it so calmly, so quietly, as if death were mercy. His mind flashed to Sarah. Her final words, "Let me rest, Silas. Let me go." He had, and he regretted it every day since. "No," he said quietly, shaking his head. "Not today." She turned her face away, her breath shallow. "You're a rancher. White man, you see Apache, you shoot." Silas's jaw tightened. "Not today," he repeated. He tore a piece of his shirt, pressed it against her wound. She tried to push his hand away, but she was too weak. "Don't waste time," she muttered, her voice fading. Silas ignored her. He lifted her carefully into his arms. She was light, fragile, like a bird with broken wing. Her body trembled against his chest. "Hold on," he said. "You're not dying out here." He carried her to his horse, mounted with effort, and began the long ride back to his ranch. The desert stretched endlessly around them. The wind was dry and sharp against his face. He could feel her heartbeat, weak and uneven against his chest. Every few minutes she stirred, trying to speak, but the words came out as whispers, in a language he didn't understand. The sun disappeared. Night fell fast. Coyotes howled in the distance. Silas rode harder, guiding his horse through the dark. His arms ached, but he didn't stop. By the time he reached his small wooden cabin, his body was shaking with exhaustion. He carried her inside, laid her gently on the bed, and lit the lantern. The wound was bad, a deep gash from what looked like a bullet close range. Someone had shot her deliberately. Silas cleaned it with warm water, his hands steady despite his racing heart. She winced in pain, whispering words in Apache that he couldn't understand. When he finished, he wrapped clean cloth around her waist, tight enough to stop the bleeding. She was half conscious, now her eyes fluttering. He sat by the fire, watching her breathe. She looked young, maybe 19 or 20. Her hair was long and black, tangled with dust and snow. Her face, even in pain, had a kind of proud strength that caught his eye. He wondered what she had been through, how she ended up alone and hurt in the middle of the desert. Silas poured water into a tin cup and went back to her side. "Drink," he said softly. She blinked, looked at him suspiciously, but took a small sip. Then she fell back asleep. He sat there for a long time, staring at the flames. He didn't know why he'd done it. He could have left her there. Nobody would have blamed him. The townsfolk didn't trust the Apache. They called them Savage's enemies. But Silas didn't see an enemy. He saw someone who had suffered enough. Maybe it was because he too knew what it felt like to lose everything. If you love this channel, comment the number 9 below. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a new story every week. Hours passed. The fire burned low. Outside, the wind carried the cry of an owl. Silas took off his hat, rubbed his tired eyes, and looked at her again. She was breathing better now. For the first time that night, he felt relief. The next morning, sunlight filled the cabin. Silas woke up in the chair where he had slept, his neck stiff, his body sore. The girl was still there, her eyes open now, watching him carefully. When he moved, she flinched. "You're awake," he said quietly. "You're safe here." Her hand shot out faster than he expected. She grabbed the knife from his belt and held it to his throat, her grip trembling but firm. "Why didn't you let me?" she asked, her voice weak but sharp. Silas didn't flinch. He looked at her calmly. "Because I've buried too many people." She stared at him, searching his face for lies, for cruelty, but his eyes were steady, tired, and honest. After a long moment, she lowered the knife. "You should have," she said quietly. Silas stood, slowly, took the knife gently from her hand, and set it on the table. "Maybe," he said, "but I didn't." He brought her a bowl of water and some bread. She hesitated, then ate a few bites, her eyes never leaving him. "What's your name?" he asked after a while. She paused, then said, "Aiyana." "Silas," he replied. "Silas Merrick." For a few seconds they looked at each other. two strangers from worlds that had only known hate. Yet in that small cabin, surrounded by silence and desert dust, something fragile and new began to take shape. Later that day, Silas stepped outside to tend the horses. He looked toward the hills, thinking about what he had just done. If anyone found out he was keeping an Apache woman under his roof, trouble would come. He could already hear the talk. Silas has gone soft. He's protecting one of them. But deep inside, he didn't care. He had made his choice. When he returned inside, Aiyana was sitting up, weak but alert. "Your wound," he said. "It wasn't an accident." She looked away. "Someone shot you," he continued. "Close range. That's not a hunting accident." Aiyana's jaw tightened. "It doesn't matter." "It does if they're still looking for you." She met his eyes defiant. "Then they'll find me. And you should let them." Silas shook his head. "Not while you're under my roof." That night, as he checked the bandages again, Aiyana's hand suddenly caught his wrist. Her eyes filled with tears, though she didn't let them fall. "You should have left me," she said softly. "My people are gone. I have nothing." Silas looked at her with quiet strength. "Maybe," he said, "but you're still breathing. That's something." For the first time since he found her, Aiyana didn't argue. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in days, she slept without fear. Silas sat by the fire again, his eyes on the flames. The desert outside was cold and endless, but for some reason the cabin didn't feel as empty anymore. Days passed slowly. Silas took care of the ranch as usual, feeding the horses, chopping wood, fixing fences. He always left early and came back when the sun went down. Aiyana spent most of her time resting, but she watched him from the window. His movements were steady, his back straight, his hands rough but gentle with the animals. He didn't ask her many questions. When he did speak, his voice was low and even. "You've got strong will," he said one evening while changing her bandage. "Most wouldn't have survived that kind of wound." Aiyana looked away. "I'm not most," he smiled faintly. "I can see that." Little by little, the distance between them began to fade. She started helping in small ways, folding his clothes, cleaning the table, feeding the fire when he was outside. Silas noticed, but didn't comment. He just left things easier for her, placing water closer to her bed, leaving food when he knew she wouldn't ask. One afternoon, as the sun climbed high, Silas heard the distant sound of hoofbeats. He stepped outside, his hand resting instinctively on his rifle. Dust was rising from the east. Riders. 3, maybe 4. He walked back inside quickly. "Stay quiet," he said to Aiyana. "And stay down." She sat up, her eyes sharp. "Who is it? Don't know yet. But if they're looking for you, I need you hidden." She stood, wincing slightly from the pain, and moved toward the back room. Silas watched her go, then stepped back onto the porch, rifle in hand. The riders approached slowly. When they were close enough, Silas recognized the man in front, a bounty hunter named Cale, rough-faced and mean-eyed. "Afternoon, Merrick," Cale said, his voice lazy but sharp. "Cale," Silas replied evenly. "We're looking for someone," Cale continued, dismounting. "Indian girl. Apache. Seen anyone like that around here?" Silas's face didn't change. "Nobody here but me." Cale smiled, showing yellowed teeth. "You sure about that? Heard there were tracks near the river. Fresh ones." "Tracks could be anyone," Silas said. "Coyotes. Drifters." Cale stepped closer, his eyes scanning the cabin. "Mind if we take a look?" Silas raised his rifle slightly. "I do mind." The tension hung heavy in the air. Cale's hand drifted toward his gun. For a moment it seemed like blood would spill. Then Cale laughed, a cold, empty sound. "All right, Merrick, we'll be on our way. But if you're hiding something," he leaned in close, "you'll regret it." He mounted his horse and rode off with the others, their laughter fading into the distance. Silas stood there watching until they were gone. Then he went back inside. Aiyana emerged from the back room, her face pale. "You lied for me." "I did." "Why?" Silas looked at her for a long moment. "Because I know what it's like to run from something you can't escape." She stepped closer. "Your wife." He nodded slowly. "Fever. 3 winters ago. I couldn't save her." Aiyana's voice was soft. "My father. My brothers. Soldiers came to our camp. Only I ran." Silence filled the cabin. Then she said, "Maybe we're both trying to save something now." Silas met her eyes. Maybe. That night Aiyana knelt outside the cabin, her hands pressed to the cold earth. She whispered words in Apache, a prayer her mother had taught her. Silas watched from the doorway, silent, respectful. When she came back inside, she said, "My people believe the earth remembers. Every footstep, every drop of blood. What does it remember about you?" Silas asked. She smiled faintly. "That I fought, and that I didn't give up." "Good," he said. "Then keep fighting." The next morning, Silas rode into town for supplies. The ride was long and the wind was cold. When he arrived, the townsfolk greeted him with mixed looks, some curious, some cold. The storekeeper, an older man named Grant, watched him carefully as he gathered flour beans and tools. "Word is you scared off Cale and his boys," Grant said as he weighed the flour. Silas didn't look up. "They came looking for trouble." Grant sighed. "You've always been a fair man, Silas. Folks are starting to see that." Silas paid and left without another word. On his way out, he passed the town board. A poster caught his eye. "Wanted Aiyana crime. Arson reward. $500. His blood ran cold. He tore the poster down and rode home fast. When he arrived, Aiyana was outside feeding the horses. She saw the look on his face and knew. "You found out," she said quietly. Silas dismounted, holding the poster. "They say you burned something important." Aiyana met his eyes, calm and unafraid. "I burned the railroad survey maps." Silas stared. "Why?" "Because they planned to run tracks through our sacred burial grounds, through the bones of my ancestors." Silas's jaw tightened. "So you're not just running from death, you're fighting for your people." "I was," she said, "until there was no one left to fight for." Silas stepped closer. "There's still you." Tears filled her eyes, but she blinked them away. "And now you know. You could turn me in. Collect the reward." He crumpled the poster and threw it into the dirt. "I'm not turning you in." "Why?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Because I was a marshal once," he said. "I was there, Aiyana. At the massacres. I saw what they did to your people. I couldn't stop it. I walked away from that life. But I never forgave myself." Aiyana's breath caught. "You were there." He nodded, his voice thick with guilt. "I didn't pull the trigger, but I didn't stop them either." She stared at him, her world spinning. Then slowly she stepped forward and placed her hand on his chest over his heart. "You saved me," she whispered. "That's enough." Days passed. The air between them had changed. What was once careful distance had become something warmer, something unspoken but real. Aiyana grew stronger. Her wound healed slowly, leaving a scar she traced sometimes, when she thought Silas wasn't watching. She worked alongside him now, feeding the horses, mending fences, hauling water from the well. She moved with grace even in pain, and Silas found himself watching her more than he should. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Aiyana handed him something small, a bracelet woven from leather and beads, worn but beautiful. "My mother made this," she said quietly. "She gave it to me before the soldiers came." Silas held it carefully, feeling the weight of her trust. "I can't take this. I want you to have it," she said. "So you remember. Remember what that mercy is stronger than hate." He tied it around his wrist, his throat tight. "I won't forget." That night, Silas carved a small wooden eagle by the fire. When he finished, he placed it in Aiyana's hand. "My wife used to say eagles never forget the sky," he said, "even when they're grounded." Aiyana looked at the carving, her eyes soft. "Then I'll keep flying." But peace never lasted long in the desert. 3 days later, Blake arrived. He came with 5 men, all armed, all hard-eyed. They rode up to the ranch at midday dusk, rising behind them like a storm. Silas stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. Aiyana stayed inside, watching through the window. Afternoon, Merrick Blake called out, his voice dripping with mock politeness. "Heard you've been keeping company with a wanted criminal." Silas's voice was steady. "She's under my protection." Blake laughed, a cold, cruel sound. "You've gone soft, old man. That girl burned property worth thousands. She's a criminal. She's a woman who stood up for her people," Silas said. "That's not a crime." Blake spat in the dirt. You're choosing the wrong side. I'm choosing the right one." Blake's smile faded. "Then you'll burn with her." He signaled to his men. They drew their guns. Silas fired first. The bullet struck the dirt near Blake's horse, sending it rearing. The men scattered, shouting. Shots cracked through the air. Glass shattered. Aiyana moved fast. She grabbed the rifle from the wall, climbed to the loft window, and fired. One of the attackers yelped and fell back, clutching his arm. The gunfire went on for what felt like forever. Smoke filled the air. Silas took cover behind a wooden post, trading shots with Blake's men. A bullet grazed his shoulder, and he grunted in pain, but he didn't stop. Aiyana fired again, her aim steady. Another man went down. Finally, Blake shouted, "Fall back." His men retreated, dragging their wounded with them. Blake glared at Silas from a distance. "This isn't over, Merrick." Then they were gone, swallowed by the desert dust. Silas leaned against the porch post, clutching his shoulder. Blood trickled down his sleeve. Aiyana ran to him, her hands trembling. "You're hurt," she said, her voice thick with fear. "It's not bad," he said, though his face was pale. She helped him inside and pressed a cloth against the wound. Tears filled her eyes as she worked. "You bled for me," she whispered. Silas looked at her through the pain. "You would have done the same." "I will," she said fiercely. "I won't let them take you." That night she stayed beside him, changing the cloth, making sure he didn't slip into fever. When morning came, the air was clear, and the smell of wet earth filled the cabin from the rain that had fallen overnight. Silas opened his eyes slowly and found her sitting next to him, half asleep, still holding his hand. "You stayed," he murmured. She nodded. "I wasn't leaving." He smiled weakly. "You kept your head. You fought well." Her eyes softened. "I remembered what my father taught me. Protect the one who protects you." For the next few days, Aiyana took care of him just as he had once cared for her. She fed the horses, fetched water, and cooked simple meals. When he tried to thank her, she only smiled and said, "Now we're even." But deep down, both of them knew it wasn't just gratitude. Something stronger had taken root between them, something quiet but unbreakable. One afternoon, Silas sat outside his arm in a sling, watching the sunset. Aiyana came out with 2 cups of coffee and handed him one. "You think they'll come back?" she asked. Silas looked toward the horizon. "Blake won't stop, but it won't just be him next time." "What do you mean he works for someone?" "A man named Clayton Hammond. Rich, powerful. He's the one building the railroad." Aiyana's face darkened. "Then he's the one who wants me dead." Silas nodded. "He sees you as a threat. You burned his maps. You cost him money." "Good," she said fiercely. Silas looked at her. "Hammond's not like Blake. He won't fight fair. He'll come with the law or worse." "Then we fight," Aiyana said. "You sure about that?" Silas asked. "You could still run. Go north. Find your people." She shook her head. "This is my fight now, and I'm not running anymore." That night they prepared. Silas checked his rifles, loaded extra ammunition, and reinforced the windows. Aiyana sharpened knives and gathered supplies. As they worked, she said softly, "If I fall, will you bury me facing east?" Toward the sunrise, Silas stopped. "You're not falling, but if I do, you won't," he said firmly. "We fight together. We survive together." She smiled faintly. "You sound like a warrior." "Maybe I was once," he said, before I forgot how. 2 days later, Hammond arrived. He came in a black carriage, flanked by 10 armed men. He stepped out slowly, dressed in a fine suit, his face calm and cold. Silas stood on the porch, rifle across his chest. Aiyana stood beside him, her chin high, her eyes defiant. Hammond smiled. "Mr. Merrick, I've heard much about you," Hammond Silas said evenly. "I'm a reasonable man," Hammond continued. "So I'll make you a reasonable offer. $1,000. All you have to do is hand over the girl." Silas's jaw tightened. "She's not for sale." Hammond's smile faded. "You're protecting a criminal, a savage who destroyed valuable property." "She's protecting her people's graves," Silas said. "That's not a crime. The law says otherwise." "Then the law's wrong." Hammond's eyes went cold. "Very well. You've made your choice." He turned to his men. "Burn it, all of it." The men moved forward, torches in hand. Silas fired a warning shot. Don't. Hammond didn't flinch. You can't stop progress, Merrick. She's already lost. You're just delaying the inevitable. Then I'll delay it as long as I can, Silas said. Aiyana stepped forward, her voice strong. You can burn the land, you can kill us, but you'll never erase what you've done. The earth remembers, and it will judge you. Hammond laughed. The earth doesn't speak. But the dead do, Aiyana said, and they're waiting for you. For a moment, something flickered in Hammond's eyes. Fear, or maybe guilt. But then, it was gone. He signaled to his men. Do it. The battle began. Torches flew. The barn caught fire. Silas and Aiyana fought side by side, their movements synchronized. She shot from the loft. He fired from the ground. One by one, Hammond's men fell back. Then, in the chaos, Blake appeared. He aimed his gun at Silas's back. Aiyana saw him. She didn't hesitate. She fired. Blake fell. Silas turned, saw her standing there, smoke rising from her rifle. Their eyes met. Thank you, he said. Always, she replied. The fire spread. A beam collapsed. Silas tackled Aiyana out of the way just in time. They rolled in the dirt, coughing, covered in ash. When the smoke cleared, Hammond was gone. His men were retreating. The barn was lost, but the cabin still stood. Silas and Aiyana sat in the dirt, breathing hard, staring at the wreckage. We survived, she said, her voice hoarse. We did, Silas said. She leaned against him, exhausted. They'll write stories about this. Wild West stories. Cowboy stories. Wild West love that breaks all the rules. Silas smiled faintly. Maybe. But I don't care about stories. I care about you. She looked up at him, her eyes shining. Then let's write our own. Weeks passed. The land began to heal. The cornfield Aiyana had planted grew tall and green, swaying gently in the wind. The barn was rebuilt piece by piece with help from a few townsfolk who had quietly changed their minds. One morning, as Silas and Aiyana worked side by side, they heard hoofbeats. Aiyana tensed, but Silas placed a hand on her shoulder. Wait. A small group of Apache riders approached. Leading them was an older man, weathered and wise. Aiyana's breath caught. Uncle. The man dismounted slowly, his eyes filled with emotion. Aiyana, we thought you were gone. She ran to him and they embraced. Tears streamed down her face. Silas stepped back, giving them space. They spoke in Apache for a long time, voices low and full of feeling. When they finished, Aiyana turned to Silas. He is my mother's brother. He's been searching for survivors. Silas nodded. You found family again. Her smile faded. They're leaving in the morning. They want me to go with them. For a moment the world went quiet. Silas's heart felt heavy, but he didn't show it. You should, he said softly. They're your people. She looked at him for a long time, her eyes searching his face. And what about you? I'll be fine, he said, forcing a small smile. The ranch needs work, as always. That night, Aiyana packed her few things, folding each piece of cloth with care. Silas watched from the doorway, saying nothing. When she finished, she turned to him. You saved my life, Silas. You gave me a reason to live again. I'll never forget that. He nodded, his throat tight. You've got a strong spirit, Aiyana. Go where you belong. But as dawn broke and her uncle's group prepared to leave, Aiyana stood still beside the horse. The sun rose over the hills, bathing the ranch in golden light. She looked at the open road ahead. Then, back at the cabin, the walls she had helped repair, the field she had planted, the man who had never turned away from her. Her uncle approached. Aiyana, it's time. But then her uncle paused. He looked at Silas, then at Aiyana, reading something in her eyes. Child, he said gently, there is something you should know. Aiyana turned to him. This man, her uncle, continued, looking at Silas. I have heard of him. Years ago, when the soldiers came to our camp, there was one who refused to shoot, one who tried to stop them. The elders spoke of him. Aiyana's eyes widened. She turned to Silas. You were there? Silas's face crumbled. I was. I tried to stop them, but I couldn't. I wasn't strong enough. I'm sorry, Aiyana. I'm so sorry. Silence hung in the air. Then Aiyana stepped forward. She placed her hand on his face, her touch gentle. "You saved me," she whispered. "You couldn't save them then, but you saved me now. That's enough." Her uncle nodded slowly. "The earth remembers child. It remembers his mercy." Aiyana looked at her uncle, then at the road, then at Silas. "My place is here," she said quietly. Silas's eyes widened. "Aiyana, this is my home now," she said firmly. "With you." Her uncle smiled, a sad but understanding smile. "Then live well, niece. Honor the old ways but build something new." He mounted his horse, and the group rode away, leaving a trail of dust behind them. Silas stood there silent, and